Hello and welcome to Smith and Sheridan on Biotech, a podcast on the science and business of biotechnology, presented by me, Cormac Sheridan.
And me, Andy Smith. Hello, Cormac. Hello, everyone.
Hey Andy, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks. How about you?
I'm doing okay. And it is the weekend.
Nearly, almost.
When one can sometimes indulge oneself with nice drinks. And if one does and one overdoes it, one does not have to worry about a condition variously known as non-alcoholic steatohepatitis or Nash, or the more modern terminology is metabolic dysfunction-associated steatohepatitis. So are we going to go with MASH or Nash in this chat?
I prefer the older ones just because I've been calling it Nash, NAFLD, non-alcoholic.
And of course, if you add a G at the front and an ER at the end, you have a very famous dog from a bygone age.
From a comic strip, yeah.
Younger listeners may not remember the Beano, but Nasher was Dennis the Menace's dog, and he had just as much attitude as Dennis himself did. That's kind of beside the point, but he was an amazing canine sideman. Very, very impressive guy. Anyway, that's a bit of a slight sort of red herring there. First time Nasher has been called a red herring, I imagine. You wanted to talk about Nash, MASH, and I know that like a few years ago, everybody was talking about Nash. It was the silent disease. It was going to be a sort of an epidemic of Nash as obesity cases rose. And this was one of the sort of very complex, progressive conditions arising from obesity, a sort of basically where the liver just becomes overwhelmed with fat buildup, inflammation, fibrosis, and maybe eventually cirrhosis, liver failure, possibly liver cancer. Serious kind of stuff. It was regarded as a very serious public health epidemic in countries with high prevalence of obesity. Basically, there was an explosion, if you like, of companies partnering with smaller biotechs in the NASH space, and it was going to become a very big market, or so we thought. Progress has been slow and difficult. Very few people have reported stellar data, the kind of slam dunk stuff that results in rapid approvals and rapid sales build-up. What's your take on this area, and why does it appear to be, well, maybe stuck isn't quite the right word, but why is it so achingly slow to deliver signs of progress?
It is, and I can't remember which JP Morgan conference it was that Intercept Pharmaceuticals announced their phase 2 study, which more than doubled their share price just before the JP Morgan conference. And then it took a bit of a hit when it was realized that the study was also stopped for safety as well as efficacy. But that started the NASH discussion. And I have a number of takes on NASH because in those years, I've been wondering whether NASH is really as big an indication as people think it is. You see lots and lots of biotech companies developing drugs for NASH or MASH, whatever we're going to call it. You see some pharmaceutical companies. I've seen clinical trial data from some pharmaceutical companies that are no longer developing those drugs in that indication. And it could be, as you've intimated, Cormac, that could be another one of the graveyard indications that we've talked about that is so difficult to treat. And part of the reason for that is because, yes, although the two prime risk factors for NASH, MASH, NAFLD, or MALD are obesity and diabetes, the sequelae of NASH, like liver fibrosis, that's dead tissue, listeners, for dead liver tissue, build up of fatty deposits in the lungs, ballooning as you see under a microscope, and inflammation. Those three disease processes, as you also said, can go on to cause cirrhosis, after fibrosis, decompensated liver disease, liver tumors, and death. Those processes, may not be completely addressed by a single agent, but also they're pretty difficult to reverse. But you also have the complication that the target organ is the liver. And the liver regenerates itself. So have we seen over the years a number of companies like Intercept claiming phase 2 success when it's only the liver regenerating itself? And we've seen that in studies that were conducted by a French biotech company whose name escapes me for the moment, that had a very high placebo rate because the diet and exercise regimes that were in the placebo arm actually help resolve NASH in a large number of patients. So,
yeah, which just goes to show, though, that actually, if you have a regenerative organ, the placebo control is actually vitally important.
yeah, which goes at odds to the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago, right? Where we who prescribes placebos? But yeah, let's get down off our high horse.
I would also raise the point too, though, that the rate of progression of the disease doesn't really map neatly onto the kind of clinical endpoints that drug developers like to use, that you'll get a good readout within 6, 12, 18 months or so.
Absolutely. Actually, it maps exquisitely onto the endpoints that payers like to use, whether they're single payer countries or commercial US payers. Death, liver failure, decompensated liver disease. Those sort of outcomes are really hard outcomes.
Yes.
And it means that the patients are economically active should they be resolved, rather than we've looked on an MRI image and there looks to be a little less fat in that part of the liver. I mean, how can you pay for that?
That doesn't cut it. And I was very intrigued, actually. I did check back on Intercept, and they obviously got a complete response letter from the FDA.
Two complete response letters.
Two complete, actually. Sorry, I left out the first one. And this is for the obeticholic acid, a kind of a synthetic bile acid product. And what I was very struck by in the language of their press release, they said that the FDA indicated in the CRL that it has completed its review of the NDA, the new drug application, and determined that it cannot be approved in its present form. Based on the content of the CRL, any resubmission of an NDA for OCA in NASH would require, at a minimum, successful completion of the long-term outcomes phase of the regenerate study. They weren't willing to follow it right through to the end. And I mean, for cardiovascular drugs, the gold standard is cardiovascular outcomes.
Yeah.
They probably didn't see enough in the acute phase of the study that they weren't going to throw good money after bad. That's perfectly understandable. But you could argue that outcomes data are needed to get a proper understanding of the function of these drugs.
Well, yes, you raise a really interesting point there, Cormac, because outcome studies are the new black. I mean, you can get a drug approved that lowers lipids. And is it going to compete against the statins or the PCSK9 drugs? If they don't save lives, if they don't have a positive outcome, yes, the drug will be approved. No one's going to pay for it without those outcome studies. So outcome studies are the new reimbursement panacea, if you like. But the FDA has in the past, in some difficult indications, and MASH, NASH is an example, has bent over backwards with the accelerated approval pathways in saying, well, let's look at these surrogate endpoints. And if you then go and demonstrate efficacy in those surrogate endpoints, then we'll approve it contingent on you showing outcomes in the future. But then against that, we've seen companies like Sarepta that has been dragging its heel in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, dragging its heels for as long as one can drag their heels for, in order not to get those results. You've seen companies like PCT Therapeutics, again in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, failing PTC, yeah, failing a confirmatory phase 3 study, and then the drug being taken off on the market. So you're right, the outcomes are the new panacea, certainly for NASH, but that's because measuring disease process, and you hinted at it in your introduction in the beginning, until the later stages, F3 or F4 fibrosis stages of NASH, this disease is completely silent. Again, that may be the reason why I'm led to conclude that the NASH market is not as big as many other people think it is, but it's a silent disease until its later stages. And that way, because you can't enroll people in the later stages and expect that much efficacy, it's better to enroll them in F2 and 3. The FDA has then said, okay, that's fine. Let's go for these surrogate endpoints like biopsy, fibrosis, and inflammation and lipid buildup, as demonstrated by a histological examination of liver biopsy. But then that adds another spanner in the works of NASH, because how many patients are you going to get who are asymptomatic with NASH to sign up for multiple liver biopsies along a clinical study? These are not nice things to do. Someone takes a hole punch and punches it through your liver.
Yeah, and very debilitating, and I imagine also a very expensive way to gather data.
Yeah, and you can see the perspective of those patients. Well, okay, I see my blood test suggests I might have NASH, but as that has not been a clinical diagnosis yet because there's no fibrosis yet, and because I don't want a liver biopsy. But also it adds to the mystique or the complication of NASH is that these patients are therefore very difficult and very expensive to find. Those people who want to put themselves through multiple liver biopsies on a clinical trials, only to find out they were on placebo, well, it's a tall ask.
Have you come across any data? I haven't looked for it now. This is a purely open question. Whether or not the skinny drugs impact on liver tissue, the fat reduction seen actually provides some benefit to people?
Well, I think it's mostly apocryphal and side effects of other studies in diabetic patients or obese patients with heart failure that you would expect. Let's leave it at that, so we're not tying ourselves to any clinical study. You would expect that if an agent has an effect on both obesity, lipid management as well, and diabetes, then you would expect it to prevent NASH. And that's another issue where co-joins again the NASH drugs and the GLP-1 agonists, because a preventative medicine that can prevent NASH could be the GLP-1 agonists. But then you're going to have to do, to prove that, a longer term outcome study to show that these patients may or may not have a clinical diagnosis of NASH, don't progress to NASH, and those in the placebo arm do. That's going to be a very large, long-term, expensive clinical studies. Great for the CROs, are not so able to be afforded by smaller biotech companies.
And Novo Nordisk, which has a massive pipeline of agents in development for NASH, although it favors MASH, just to be accurate and acknowledge their switch in the disease nomenclature. They do have a phase 3 trial ongoing with their GLP-1 agonist semaglutide, which obviously is approved in obesity. But in a phase 2 trial, which they did report to their credit in the New England Journal of Medicine, they didn't get a statistically significant effect. They got some sort of numerical effect, but it wasn't statistically significant. This was, a serious trial, 320 patients. 230 of them had stage F2 or F3 fibrosis. So they had real fibrosis. And they talked about NASH resolution with no worsening of fibrosis. Well, they claimed 40% in the low dose group, 36% in the middle dose, 59% in the high dose. And the placebo effect was 17%. And there was weight loss.
Which you would expect, right?
Yeah. And 3 patients had reported malignant neoplasms in the drug treatment arms, none in the placebo arm, which is interesting.
Yeah, and it adds a complication to these studies because, the liver is not the most forgiving of organs to be addressed or targeted by drug technologies. So you change something in the metabolism of lipids in the liver, or even bile salts aspects or something with a drug targeted at the liver, you got to expect it to fight back somehow. So if you reduce lipid buildup in the liver, it's going to go somewhere. So in these studies, in a number of studies, you've seen a very sometimes intolerable side effect profile with bile salts being released, liver enzymes, indication of damage to the liver being released, and lipids going up. They're not being stored in the liver, they've got to go somewhere. So you can actually see the liver almost fighting back in attempt to cure itself by expelling these drugs that are mucking its metabolism up.
Okay. And then, just because they're in the same territory, Novo Nordisk's compatriot Zealand Pharma has partnered with Boehringer Ingelheim on a dual glucagon and GLP-1 agonist survodutide, and that's also in phase 3 for obesity and NASH. So that's one set of things. There's a whole bunch of antisense development efforts ongoing.
Yeah, and that's again because naturally antisense drugs can be targeted, but will naturally be detoxified in the liver, so they'll go there anyway. It's a good target organ for them.
Yeah, exactly. I remember one time saying to an executive at an antisense company that if the liver hadn't evolved anyway, the pharmaceutical industry would have had to invent it.
Either that or whoever invented hepatitis viruses would have invented it.
Yeah, it's true. But obviously the liver is the great metabolic clearinghouse of our systems, and it has multiple receptors for fishing all sorts of things out of the bloodstream as the blood passes through. So that's why stuff goes to the liver. And there's a whole bunch of different genes that are being targeted. Say hydroxysteroid 17 beta dehydrogenase. AstraZeneca and Ionis Pharmaceuticals have a program there, as do Regeneron and Alnylam. So the latter have an siRNA, and AstraZeneca and Ionis obviously have an antisense oligonucleotide. You've got AstraZeneca and also Novo Nordisk. And of course, Novo Nordisk now is an RNAi player since its acquisition of Dicerna.
Yeah.
And so that brought it in a couple of Dicerna-originated programs, one inhibiting mitochondrial amidoxime reducing component 1 and LXRA. And then you've got with AstraZeneca and Alnylam, they're both AstraZeneca, and Ionis and Regeneron and Alnylam are also going after PNPLA3, patin-like phospholipase domain containing 3. And that has some relationship with how fat is kind of held and stored in the liver. You see, there are some genetic association studies here. There have been sort of some studies that show kind of, say, variations in certain genes involved in fat storage in the liver can be associated with higher risk of these conditions. And so there's a certain logic about targeting them. But I don't know whether you can fish out particular patient populations who are at higher risk. That might be a cleaner way to get an effect.
Yeah, and I think from a commercial perspective, you want a new drug, right? And another hat to companies like Novo Nordisk, who are studying their GLP-1 receptor agonists in MASH, NASH, whatever we're going to call it, because they are going out to do with these and other collaborations and studies. They're going out to own metabolism. They're not sitting on their GLP-1 receptor agonist laurels, like arguably we talked about Pfizer did with the billions it made from the COVID vaccines. They're not sitting on their laurels. They're going out to own the metabolic cardiovascular space. And that's great. I'm also wondering whether to resolve NASH in a meaningful way, not necessarily the first drug to market, but the market that resolves NASH in most patients. Because there are so many disease processes involved in NASH, we talked about fibrosis, we talked about inflammation and liver fat buildup. Because there are so many disease implications of NASH, one active ingredient might not do it. And you've already seen even biotech companies using combinations of their products with a GLP-1 agonist in NASH studies to address that. But going back to GLP-1s and NASH, again, you have an age-old commercial problem because these drugs are on the market for the treatment of obesity and the treatment of diabetes at a known price and a known dosage that seems efficacious, between variations between those two. You bring in another much more serious indication like MASH or NASH, and a dosage that might be similar to treating diabetes. You don't, if you're the drug sponsor, you don't want the same price as you're charging for diabetes because it's a much more significant indication associated with even more death and mortality and morbidity. So you're almost stuck, if you like, of needing to find another drug to go along with the GLP-1s to make it commercially viable.
Yeah, and that's okay though. I mean, people with serious cardiovascular disease often take a stack of medications, cancer, obviously combination therapies. I mean, let's face it, most diseases are complex.
Yeah, and polypharmacy is another new panacea, isn't it? So.
Well, yeah, it can also be a bit of a pharmacokinetic.
Yeah.
But I think though, I mean, the next few months, in fact, now that we're in February, next month, I believe, is when Medical Pharmaceuticals, a company that you pointed out to me, probably the most advanced NASH program underway at present. And they have a PDUFA date, I think, in March for their thyroid hormone receptor beta agonist, resmetirom. And that's probably going to answer some of the questions that you're raising, is it?
Yeah, some of them. I mean, meeting the surrogate endpoints that the FDA has laid out, the multiple hurdles that the FDA has laid out in order to get a drug approved under accelerated approval. The Madrigal's drug seems to do that, but we won't have seen as much data as the FDA reviewers are going to see on it. So, we have to defer. Much of what I read, people will say this is going to be the first drug that's approved to treat MASH, but then they said that with Intercept's drug on NASH, and that didn't happen either. It won't address the question I still have in that how big a market is MASH or NASH? And then how big a market is MASH or NASH going to be once the GLP-1s for obesity and diabetes, have been in use for much longer? Because you would expect they would prevent patients progressing to, even if they're not MASH or NASH patients at entry. If your lipids and your glucose is effectively treated, then you won't go on to develop MASH or NASH. So my question is, yes, you can probably get a single drug approved. Yes, we'll see combinations of drugs appearing to treat MASH or NASH. But I think the proof of the pudding will be a number of years down the line where we'll find out how many patients there really are. And we talked before we started that the answers are out there. Okay, if you're a US insurance company, you have a payer database of all your insured lives. So you know how many patients in the last 20 years have been diagnosed and died or resolved NASH. You know how many of your insured lives are on there now. My guess is that big pharma companies pay to access those databases, so they know, as well as the insurance companies. So we have a large number of big pharma companies who scrub the payer databases and know how big a market NASH is. Mm-hmm. And you've talked about AstraZeneca and Novo. I wonder, whether the market is that big, whether they've done those studies, but certainly the biotech companies, if they know at all about payer databases and how you work out the size of a market from those, they'll probably prefer to spend money on the flagpole in their new office car park than pay to access the databases, because you never really want to ask a question where you're not going to like the answer. So that aspect of how big a market is MASH and NASH, for me, is still to be determined.
Okay, and maybe resmetirom will be the product that will help us to determine that.
Well, yes and no. It hasn't stopped Alzheimer's disease. We heard this week that the first drug approved to treat Alzheimer's disease is now being dropped by Biogen. Yes. That didn't stop all the others coming to the market after it. So, correct, a drug development, clinical development, gravy train that we still don't know where it's going to dock.
Yeah, because, resmetirom, they did publish the data in a Nature Medicine paper some time ago, and it certainly has multiple effects. Steroids. Very strong effects there.
I'm sure we're going to have the same sort of thing as we're having with lipid management. We're going to say, if the FDA does approve Madrigal's drug, then the payers are going to say, that's great. You've met the bar for the FDA in terms of accelerated approval and the surrogate endpoints that we've used. But we'll put some constraints on that. Let's put it into a registry study, show us the outcomes data, and then we'll be over the moon about reimbursing. Yeah. Not that payers ever over the moon about reimbursing any expensive drug, but they won't really have a choice at that point.
Yeah, because they've obfuscated a lot of the efficacy data. March 14th is the PDUFA date. You're not expecting, I take it, any kind of a rapid rollout of this drug, or are you?
I think you get a drug approved, especially if it's not by a big pharma company. And we've seen some fantastic launches by big pharma when they can put the money behind them and the commercial infrastructure behind them. The RSV vaccines from Pfizer and GSK have done great guns. A small biotech company in an indication that's diagnosed and treated largely by gastroenterologists and hepatologists, sure, you need a smaller sales force. But then we go back to how many patients is that, and then can they address them all? And I'm sure Madrigal would rather be acquired by a big pharma company than do the commercial job themselves. On the other hand, a big pharma company might have already looked at the patient databases and found out it's not as big as they wanted to be. So the proof of the pudding, as in a lot of cases these days, comes after the FDA approval in terms of how many patients are there and how easy they are to find and get treated.
And the market's currently valuing them at in excess of $4 billion, which obviously is a sizable chunk of cash. And if you wanted to buy them, you might have to offer a considerable premium over that.
Yeah.
If you're getting into $7, $8, $9 billion, that would be a lot of cash for what you're pointing out is an unproven market.
But you see companies pay big money for drugs that we've both seen in the past. Companies makes them awfully expensive and just awful acquisitions.
True. Yeah.
But on the other hand, we've had Novartis both at JP Morgan and their JP Morgan conference and their results this week saying their sweet spot is nothing more than $5 billion in terms of acquisitions. We're saying BMS might go up to $8 billion. But I think companies are balking now at paying $8 to $10 billion, which is a lot of money. I can't imagine what $8 to $10 billion is for something that is very uncertain and unproven. And if we're hoping to find ourselves out of a wilderness, or the biotech sector to find itself out of a wilderness, it may not be by these bigger ticket acquisitions, that it may be by the smaller things or the mid-range things that Novo Nordisk is doing, and not what Novartis didn't do. That's a double negative with cytokinetics. So Novartis was rumored to be the acquirer of cytokinetics, or to be the company it was looking to acquire, and they never did it because probably too expensive for them at more than $8 billion.
So we're at this kind of moment, I guess, of uncertainty. And also, it's interesting to me because some years ago, NASH was one of those diseases that I'd never heard of in my life. And then next minute, everybody's talking about it. And that's because it's obviously being pushed by the PR departments of the companies involved quite successfully.
Yeah.
And then things quietened down because they weren't seen to be delivering. And I suppose all of that is going to start ramping up again if Madrigal gets its approval.
So we've had other things to focus on in the last year. Again, we've had the skinny jabs that came from, not from nowhere, but they came from a lower level, and they got public and influencer endorsement. So they've come to take over the landscape, if you like, of new drugs. And it's a shame the drugs that address NASH have taken a back seat in that.
Yeah, and the skinny jabs were an overnight success after 15 years, let's not forget.
Yeah, but then there's the other irony that the skinny jabs might be the drugs that resolve NASH and prevent it anyways.
Yes, and I think that's really interesting, but it would also be really interesting to see the skinny jabs combined with an agent that has kind of proven its mettle in NASH. But I do think, though, weight loss and also diabetes, they both lend themselves to the kind of endpoints that are measurable within the kind of timeframes that clinical trials normally are conducted. That's the problem with NASH.
Yeah, and also because weight loss you can measure quite easily. Not just a patient, the physicians as well. So you can't really change. You can't really fix your weight loss. And again, HbA1c, serum glucose, quite easily to measure, because we know if they increase, then that results in some bad aspects of diabetes. So really easy to do. The problem with MASH and NASH is that for most of the disease course that we talked about, it's a silent disease. So you need, in this case, outcome studies much more than you would do for diabetes and obesity, because you know what happens if you don't control your glucose. You know what happens if you don't control your weight. People don't feel they have NASH when they have it. So how are you going to convince them that they need to have liver biopsies and take these drugs that are not nice in order to resolve something they don't feel at the moment? It's a difficult ask.
Yeah, it's a difficult ask. And sometimes it is the case that the pharma industry, on the currently available science, isn't able to deliver. I think the Madrigal experience of the next 12 months is going to be very telling for us.
Let's check back after that one, eh?
Let's do that. Until the next time. Thanks, Andy.
Cheers, Cormac. Bye-bye.